Medieval warfare wasn't just armor and big battles. It also came with rule books. Kings and commanders issued campaign ordinances that told soldiers exactly what they could say, where, take, and even when they were allowed to start a fire. Some of these rules sound ridiculous today, but they were written down, read out to troops, and enforced because an army could fall apart fast without discipline. You'll hear about forbidden battle cries, strict rules for prisoners and ransoms, limits on looting, and orders meant to stop fights inside the camp before they spread. Let's get into the first one. Number 1. The havoc word ban. In some late medieval English campaign rules, one of the fastest ways to get yourself in serious trouble was to shout a single word, havoc. It sounds harmless now, but inside an army it meant something very specific. It was the signal that told people, stop holding the line and start grabbing what you can. Commanders knew what followed. Discipline collapses, soldiers scatter, and fights break out over loot and prisoners. So the ordinances treated the word itself like a weapon. If you started the cry, you could be executed. In some versions, anyone who joined in could also be punished, with penalties ranging from loss of horses and equipment to prison or fines. That harshness makes more sense when you picture a medieval host as a moving town. Thousands of people, animals, carts, and supplies packed together. One wrong call and the whole system breaks. Also, leaders did not want random looting before a town had officially fallen or before an area had been declared fair game. If havoc went up too early, it could ruin negotiations, trigger revenge, or pull troops away from the real fight.
The weird part is how direct it is. Not, don't loot, but don't say the word that starts the looting. And because these ordinances came with fixed penalties, plus officers whose job was to judge and punish, it was more than a suggestion. Once you see that, the next rule feels like the same idea in a different form. Number 2. No fake alarms. To horse. Medieval armies relied on shouted cues, drums, and horns because you could not text or radio anyone. That made the wrong shout dangerous. One rule bans cries like, to horse, basically mount up, and other alarm calls that might throw the whole host into panic. Some versions even break the punishment down by status. A man-at-arms might lose his best horse, an archer might lose his horse, and a foot archer or groom could lose an ear. Other versions focus on arrest and heavy fines. Either way, the point is the same. A false alarm is treated like sabotage. In at least one version, there is even a set reward for the person who reports the offender, so the army is encouraged to police itself. It sounds almost silly until you think about the consequences. A mounted charge that launches at the wrong moment, or a retreat that starts because someone yelled the wrong thing, can get people killed and can turn a controlled march into chaos. Commanders were trying to stop two problems at once: honest mistakes and deliberate troublemaking. A bad actor could shout a panic cry, cause confusion, and then use the chaos to steal, desert, or settle a personal score. So the law treats noise as a security issue. It is the medieval version of don't pull the fire alarm. With havoc and to horse, you can already see a pattern. Armies were policed not just by weapons, but by rules about words. Now add one more layer, and it gets even stranger. What you had to wear.
Number 3. The St. George front and back rule. English ordinances required everyone on their side, no matter their nationality, to wear the sign of St. George on the front and the back. And the text is brutally practical about why. If you did not wear it and you got hit by your own side in the confusion, nobody would be blamed for it. On top of that, an enemy was forbidden to wear the St. George sign at all
under penalty of death, though later versions made an exception for prisoners kept under guard by their captors. That sounds like a medieval dress code, but it is really about identification in a world without uniforms. In battle, faces are hidden, helmets look similar, and languages in the same army can be mixed. The easiest way to prevent friendly attacks is a big, simple badge that can be seen from a distance. The "no blame" line tells you how serious commanders were about it. They were warning soldiers in advance that if you skip the marker, you are choosing the risk. And the ban on enemies wearing it shows the other fear. Spies, infiltrators, and people trying to slip through a camp at night by blending in. Once you have a visible symbol, you also need rules about who is allowed to travel and who is allowed to enter the army at all. Number 4. Safe conduct is not die. Medieval warfare ran on written permissions, safe conducts that let someone travel through hostile territory, enter a camp, or leave it without being attacked. These were not casual favors. In the English ordinances, only the king and the top military officials, the constable and marshal, were allowed to grant safe conduct to a prisoner, to an enemy, or to anyone else. The rule is strict in both directions. No one should grant a pass for an enemy to come into the host, and no one should let an enemy or prisoner leave it without proper authority. Nobody was supposed to create a safe conduct on their own authority under their own seal.
And breaking an official safe conduct was treated as a major crime, with punishments that could include execution and forfeiture of property. It sounds like paperwork obsession, but it is really about control. If random captains can issue passes, enemies can enter the host to spy. Prisoners can wander out to negotiate ransoms and come back with information. Safe conduct also protected negotiations. A commander might invite enemy messengers, heralds, or local leaders to talk. If soldiers ignore the safe conduct and attack them anyway, the army gains a reputation for bad faith and future surrenders become harder. So the rule is basically no freelance diplomacy, no homemade passes, and no "I didn't know." Once you control movement, you also have to control the simplest daily problem in any medieval campaign, where everybody sleeps. Number 5. Lodging is assigned, not chosen. Campaign ordinances talk a lot about lodgings because a marching army needs order at the end of each day. Special officers, often called harbingers, acted like quartermasters. They went ahead, chose where units would lodge, and assigned quarters. The rules said you were not supposed to take lodgings unless they were assigned by the proper officers, and once you were placed, you were not supposed to move out for any reason without permission. Some texts even require lords to register the names of their harbingers with the senior officers, basically putting the quartermasters on an official list. The penalty for ignoring the system could be losing your horses and equipment, plus arrest, and in some versions, lower status men faced harsher physical punishments. This is one of those laws that sounds petty until you think about what lodging meant. Your assigned place determined who you guarded at night, which roads you controlled, how fast you could form up in an emergency, and how supplies were distributed. If people wandered off to grab the best houses, the army's watch system breaks, and the camp becomes a target for surprise attacks. It also tied into discipline around civilians. If the host is allowed to self-quarter without limits, it turns into organized theft. That is why related clauses banned robbing or pillaging other people's lodgings once they were assigned. Once the sleeping plan is fixed, the next problem is feeding thousands of mouths without your own soldiers turning on the supply chain. Number 6. Don't touch the army market. English ordinances could be extremely blunt.
Do not rob anyone of food, forage, or anything else, and do not rob the merchants and sellers who bring supplies to refresh the host. In Richard II's campaign rules, the penalty for robbing victuals and forage was beheading, and informers were promised a significant cash reward for reporting offenders. Later versions expand the idea. Not only are victualers and merchants protected, but even specialists like medics and barbers are mentioned as people who should not be robbed. Some versions also spell out the moral logic. You are not just stealing from a person, you are damaging the whole army, because supplies are what keep the host moving. That detail is easy to miss, but it matters. Medieval armies needed craftsmen who could repair gear, treat wounds, shoe horses, and keep basic hygiene. If those people fear being robbed by the very army they serve, they stop showing up. So the law is protecting logistics. It is saying, if you steal from the supply line, you are attacking your own army. And the reward to informers shows another enforcement trick. Commanders created a system where soldiers watched each other. In a huge camp, that was often the only realistic way to catch thieves. Of course, even with supply rules, arguments still happened, especially over the two most valuable things in medieval war: equipment and prisoners. That leads to one of the strangest enforcement details of all. Number 7. No camp riots, and pages paid the price. The ordinances did not just say, behave. They got specific. If disputes break out over arms, prisoners, or lodgings, nobody is allowed to start a riot, gather a crowd, or form an unauthorized assembly inside the host. Leaders of such assemblies could lose horses and equipment and be put under arrest. And if the troublemakers were grooms or pages, the punishment could include losing an ear.
There are also clauses aimed at old grudges. No one is supposed to start debates in the host over past or future hatreds that could lead to killings, and anyone trying to stir people up by loudly crying his own name or his lord's name could face the harshest penalties. It is shocking, but the logic is consistent. A medieval army was full of young attendants and servants. They carried messages, moved gear, and followed knights around. They were also the people most likely to start fights because they lived right on top of each other. The law is basically warning, if you are not a commander, do not try to solve your grievance by rallying a crowd. Instead, the text says to bring complaints to the constable and marshal, who would judge the case. That matters because it shows these rules were linked to real courts. In the later Middle Ages, laws of arms were treated as an enforceable system, with cases heard in bodies like the Court of Chivalry in England and the Parlement of Paris in France. So, when an ordinance says, present it to the constable and marshal, it is pointing to an actual legal process, not just a moral lecture. Once you realize medieval war had its own courtroom culture, the next rule sounds less like comedy and more like paperwork. How to prove you captured someone.
Number 8. Prisoner capture needed a receipt.
In a modern context, the idea sounds absurd. To claim a prisoner, you might need to take his helmet or his right gauntlet as a sign. But that is exactly the sort of rule found in these ordinances. The captor was expected to take the prisoner's faith, a pledge to surrender, and also take a clear physical pledge like a bassinet, helmet, or a gauntlet. If the captor failed to do that, and another soldier later came upon an unguarded prisoner and took that helmet or right gauntlet as a pledge, the second person could claim the prisoner. Other related clauses even imagine messy real-life moments. If one man throws an enemy to the ground and runs back into the fight, and another man takes the pledge from that same enemy, the prisoner may be shared between them. This was not about souvenirs. It was about ownership in a world where prisoners were valuable. Knights and well-equipped men could be ransomed, and even ordinary soldiers could be traded or used as leverage. That created constant disputes.
Two people might claim the same captive, or someone might accuse another of stealing his prisoner. The law tries to reduce the chaos by forcing a simple proof system. A visible pledge is like a receipt that other soldiers recognize, and it also discourages negligence. If you are careless and you let a prisoner wander, you can lose your claim. Which brings us straight to the next rule. Once you take a prisoner, you are not done. You are now responsible for a chain of reporting and control. Number 9. Prisoners had to be registered and guarded. Some ordinances require that when a soldier takes a prisoner, he must bring that prisoner to his captain or master, or else he risks losing his share of the value. Then the captain is expected to present the prisoner to the king, the constable, or the marshal quickly, so that the army leadership can learn the enemy's plans and situation.
In later versions, this step is given a deadline, like within 8 days. The rules also say prisoners are not supposed to roam freely in the host or leave their lodgings without an escort. If a captor lets a prisoner move around at will, the penalty can include losing the prisoner, and the value of that prisoner can be divided as a reward to the accuser and to the army officials, while the negligent captor faces arrest. And there is a hierarchy for major captives. Some versions say that if the prisoner is a very high-ranking lord, he can become the prisoner of the principal captain of that part of the host, unless the captor is of equal or higher status, with compensation arranged so the captor is not simply cheated. On top of that, a prisoner is not supposed to leave the host to seek ransom unless the king or senior officers give permission, and in some versions, not without an official safe conduct. This sounds strict because it is. Medieval commanders worried about intelligence leaks. A prisoner who walks around camp can see troop numbers, watch preparations, and learn who is commanding what. They also worried about money and authority. If prisoners wander off to negotiate their own ransoms, captains lose control of profits, and the king loses oversight of major political captives. So the law turns captivity into an administrative process. Capture, pledge, guard, report, and only then negotiate. And once prisoners and booty are treated like regulated assets, it is not surprising that the ordinances go further and tell you exactly how the profits get split.